every Hmong kid's worst nightmares started at these apartments in Sacramento, California. This apartment was full of Asians and mostly Hmong that were just coming to America in the early 1990s. The apartment used to be blue and had little taste in looks. It was old, and people called it the ghetto. Now it's been remodeled, and I don't know if there are still Hmong people living there. When I was a kid during the 90s, I had a lot of cousins living there at Greystones. Almost every weekend, there were jingle bells there. As kids, you made friends with all the other kids, even if you didn't live at the apartments too. Well, the ghost and superstitious part of the story I'm going to tell you are just rumors, but the event of murder case is real. At Greystones, like average Hmong kids, kids there would often play hide-and-go-seek, cops and robbers, or tag. One day, a group of kids were playing tag. There was this tall, dead grass meadow. The other side of the apartments were separated by the apartment's black fence. On the other side of the meadow are some ghetto duplexes and houses. Some of the kids that were part of the tag game decided to hide in that meadow. The meadow had some unwanted junk there by people loitering. Two kids decided that they were going to hide in a pile of junk that consisted of some old furniture. There were two old couches over one another. When the kids got there, they thought of hiding in between it. As they were trying to get in, one of the kids noticed someone already lying in there. The kids were grown up enough to know what it was, so they freaked out and ran to tell the other kids. More kids came to check it out, and since there were some older kids there, they decided to lift off the top couch and check out what was under there. The younger ones stood by watching. When they moved it, it revealed a dead corpse. I don't recall how old it was, but it was a dead corpse of a white lady. The news got to one another, and eventually police showed up to the site. The girl was assaulted, murdered, and disposed there. Soon after, creepy things started to happen around the apartments. Kids running back into the meadow from games would see a white lady in jeans and a white tank top searching through the junk laying around. When she spotted the kids that were looking at her, she would freak out and eventually run to hide at the furniture that was at the same spot the corpse was found. People coming home late at night would notice that there was a white lady wandering around the apartment's parking lot, sometimes crying. One night, a family in the apartments were having a movie night. The mom and dad were pretty young and had 3 little children. The youngest one started to cry a lot. The mom tried to calm the baby down, but it would still keep on crying. The mom then gave the baby to the dad while she went to make a bottle. The father tried to calm the baby down. Then he noticed that the baby kept on staring the other way towards the living room window and then crying again. So this time, he decided to look as well. When he looked, he saw a lady standing outside the window. He freaked out and grabbed his children and told the wife to go to bed now, not telling the wife what he saw. In the middle of the night, someone began knocking on their door. The mom told the dad to go get it, but he kept insisting not to. The mom was getting irritated and told the husband that if he doesn't do it, then she would. He told her to just ignore it and that he'll tell her in the morning why. The wife picked up on his hint and understood. She got scared and went to sleep. The next morning, he explained to his wife what he saw at the window. The thing was that their apartment is on the 2nd floor, and on the 2nd floor, the living room window had no patio on the outside. It was just a straight drop down since the patio only goes and stops at the door. At Greystones, sometimes there is also security that drives through for their rounds. There was a Hmong guy working his first night as a security. One of his rounds was at Greystones. It was very late at night and everybody was in bed. The security did his round driving through. Since he finished a little quick, he decided to park his car and just rest a little bit. As he rested, someone knocked on his window. He looked and it was a white lady. she started saying stuff. As for him, his English was not too good since he was one of those who barely just got into the States. He stopped her and grabbed his phone or radio to call for an interpreter to get there. He let the lady sit inside the back seat as they waited and as he stood outside. When the other security got there, they walked over to his car. Upon opening the back seat, it was empty. No one was sitting there. The Hmong guy got really confused. He swore up and down that there was a lady sitting there. Eventually, the other security guard left. As the Hmong security guard thought everything through, he realized that there couldn't be anyone here at this late hour. The very next day, he quit his job. I was once married to a Hmong guy in Sacramento, California. We usually go to bed together. However, this one night, I couldn't fall asleep, so he passed out first. Finally, it was around 1 to 2 a.m., so I decided to hit the sack. I turned on the little nightlight in our bedroom, then crawled into bed and cuddled next to him. Both of his arms were around my waist, holding me while I held his hands. 10 to 15 minutes passed and I couldn't fall asleep. While laying next to my husband, I was thinking about what I will do tomorrow. Going to my mom and dad's house or the AA supermarket. Then, I heard a shuffling noise, like something scratching. As I listened carefully, it sounded like it was coming from under the bed. Yeah, it did freak me out a little bit, but I just thought that maybe it was a mouse or something, and since it was during the middle of the night, I didn't want to make a big fuss out of it and wake my in-laws up. The noise stopped for a few seconds. Then there it was, the noise again. Except this time, it felt wrong. Our room suddenly became cold. It really freaked me out, but I just laid still and tried not to move, thinking that maybe it was just all in my head. Suddenly, something was moving from under my pillow. At that point, I reached under my pillow with one of my hands. I got a bit irritated. It was then that I felt a cold hand, and it moved. Now, this couldn't be my husband's hands because both of his arms were still around my waist. It happened so fast that before I could even think if it was actually a hand, it grabbed my hair and pulled it. It pulled my hair under the bed from under the pillow. At that point, I just lost it and screamed. I knew it was a hand because while I reached under the pillow, I grabbed the hand, the wrist to be precise, and felt the fingers moving really fast as it grabbed my hair. This freaked out my husband, so he jumped up from his sleep. By then, the thing already had let go, and I could hear the hand pulling back under the bed quickly. I told them that something pulled my hair from under the bed, and I sobbed. Of course, nothing was under the bed as we looked, but I did wake up my in-laws with my scream. When I told them what happened, they said that I might have just been dreaming. I wasn't even asleep yet, and I knew what I felt and touched, not to mention my hair being pulled. Long story short, being married to him, I've experienced a lot of crazy things around me. I was told that his family, the men in particular, were cursed by a female ghost. She follows the men around ever since their great-grandpa's time back in Laos. I have no idea why, but after we got divorced, everything was peaceful again. However, that night will always haunt me to this day. Every night before I go to bed, I always make sure that my hair does not touch the side or top edge of the bed. This took place in North Sacramento on October 5th, 2012. It was a late Friday night around the time of 9 p.m. and me and a group of people were all at the park. 3 of the friends, including me, were drinking heavily, while everyone else was just laughing at our stupidity and our jokes. Being drunk and careless, we decided to enter this abandoned apartment. I always carry a flashlight whenever I go out late. Since I had the only flashlight, I went in first and we all went together, holding each other's hands or by each other's shirts. I went upstairs and everybody followed. When entering this room, I had this really scary thought and I could feel this evil presence. Anyways, what we saw was this bed that had a compass, some scrolls, a silver watch, and just a ton of paper that was on this small bed. Since I was the only one with a backpack, I told my friend to hold my flashlight while I grabbed everything. As soon as I grabbed everything, one of the friends just had to mention about ghosts and saying how he didn't believe in it, saying that if he ever met a ghost, he'd kill it. Another friend said that this place has been closed down for years and there could be some spirits who still roams freely around here. Bringing up the supernatural made everyone panic. Because we were in a dark place, everyone wanted to back out. Since my friend had my flashlight, I told them to go first and that I'll be the last one behind because they were all scared. As everyone was leaving the room, out of nowhere, I felt this really cold hand touch my shoulder. I turned around and saw this thing that was my height, 5'6". This spirit was my exact height, and it was for sure a girl because of the long hair she had. When I turned around to look at her, she hit me on the forehead with a toilet paper roll that's already been used up. I then fainted, and the next thing I know was that I was on the really small bed, tied up. I couldn't move either because she had some kind of spell on me, but I could talk. I started yelling at her to let me go, but then she turned around and I could actually see her face. There was no blood on her mouth, nor red eyes as I expected, but I saw this really mean look as if she was going to tear me apart. Suddenly I was murmuring in Hmong shaman chantings. I don't know how I did this, but I started to chant to her. She got scared and vanished. A couple of seconds later, my parents and my friends came and found me tied up in that room. They untied me and I told them about what I saw and what it said to me. My parents told me to be quiet and we rushed home. We later called my grandpa, who lives in South Sacramento. When my dad called my grandpa, someone or something knocked on our front door. It wasn't even knocking, it was more of a pounding. They were pounding on our door with all their might. This continued on for 10 minutes, and then it stopped. We all just sat in the living room, waiting for the arrival of my grandpa. My dad told everyone to grab a Hmong knife and told my mom to get out the goat horns and shaman strings. When my grandfather finally arrived, he did his rituals and said that we bothered the ghost that lived among the apartment. She wanted to make things even by following me and disturbing me as well. I mean, you do kind of deserve it. The next morning, we found piles of rocks outside our cemented sidewalks. It seemed as if someone was going to throw these rocks at our house, but they didn't. My parents lectured me and my siblings and told us to never hang out this late, especially at the park and apartment ever again. So my cousin and I were fishing for catfish one night at one of the close-by rivers. The night started off a little bit weird. We started fishing at about 9 p.m. The place we were fishing at was only accessible by animals from both sides of us. There was a creek behind us and everything was basically the woods. We were talking about all kinds of things throughout the night, and then we started getting into discussing life and death. This was when we heard weird noises that were out of the ordinary. They didn't seem to fit the wilderness. It sounded like they were women's voices. We weren't getting any bites, so we decided that we would leave at 11 if we didn't catch anything. As 11 p.m. came closer, we weren't close to leaving, but still not a touch of the bait. At 11, all of a sudden, I heard the loudest growl that shook me. It felt like something on the right of me, and I jumped up as high and quick as I ever had before. I turned to my cousin, who was sitting on my left, and I saw a terrified look on his face. Not wanting to jump to conclusions, I asked him what was wrong. He said, "Did you hear that?" I replied, "What did you hear?" "That crazy growl, it shook my whole body." I looked at him and asked, "Are you sure?" He was very certain. so I told them that I heard it too. After it happened, it went completely quiet. No rustling of the leaves, nothing. Almost like everything just shut up. We drove around the pond a couple of times to see what we might be able to find, but nothing. The two of us decided that whatever it was didn't want us there, so we went back home. The next day, I was telling my other cousin about this, and this is where things got even more weird. When we showed up to the same spot, we could hear the fish jumping. My cousin from yesterday said that we better catch something good tonight, smiling and giggling. I got really excited and started to set up my gear, noticing I left the top piece of my rod inside the car. My cousin already had his line in the water. As I was making my way back to the car, I could hear him yelling, telling me to come back because something was biting like crazy, but he couldn't hook them. I quickly made my way back down, but I saw that he wasn't alone. I saw a little boy just smiling at me while he was playing with my cousin's fishing rod, bending the tip so it looks like a fish is biting. I told him to drop his fishing rod and come up here. As he was walking up, I just sprinted to the car and he did not hesitate to follow behind me. We got into the car and took off, leaving everything there. He asked me what was wrong, and I told him that they were not bites that he was getting, but instead a little boy playing with his fishing pole. To this day, I don't fish at night anymore, and that incident scarred me for life. We lived in an old apartment in Fresno, California, on the street of Huntington. The apartment is probably 30 to 40 years old. I searched it up. I remember one day, my mom told me one of her dreams. She dreamt of an old lady with long gray hair that was wearing Hmong clothes, the ones for the dead. My mom said that she was sleeping on the sofa and suddenly dreaming that the old lady just appeared in the hallway. My mother took a look at her and she started coming closer. As the old lady was getting closer to where my mom was sleeping, my mom noticed that she had a strange walk. It was a walk as if she was limping, but also not limping, tilting but not tilting. Then my mom finally noticed that the old lady's legs were swapped. Her right leg was on the left side instead, and vice versa. My mom was so scared she started to spit at the old lady. The old lady only came closer and closer, but when my mom started to spit a lot at the lady, she just vanished. My mom woke up and was so scared that she woke us all up to stay with her. This is one of my friend's story that I want to share with you all. The story took place in Southern California. One summer day, her little family and some cousins planned a little lake trip. They had a great time. They swam, had barbecue food, and just hung out socializing. The sun was going down and it started getting late, so everyone got ready and packed up everything to come home. But somehow they forgot their daughter's blanket and left it there at the lake, thinking nothing of it. When they got home that night, their daughter was acting strangely. She would stay up and cry all night and get so scared to sleep. She was only 2 years old at this time. Some nights, she would cry as if someone or something was hurting her, and this kept on happening for a couple of days. Finally, they told the in-laws what had been happening, and they did one known to see what was wrong. When the shaman was done doing his ritual, he told them that the reason why their daughter has been crying a lot was because they left something at the lake. A child pilgrim ghost got a hold of it and followed them home by smelling the scent of the blanket. Since the blanket was their daughter's, that ghost was targeting her. That's why she cries every night, because it comes out and bothers her. The shaman had to do another ritual to force the ghost out of the house and tie a string on the baby's hand. Moral of the story: pick up after yourself when you are at an unknown area. Back in 2007, a few of my guy friends and I decided to embark on our first camping trip together. There were about 8 of us in total, and our destination was Kings Canyon National Park in California. We set off around 2 in the morning, eager to find a camping ground and set up our tents before indulging in some fishing and swimming. Arriving at 5 a.m., we quickly realized that all the prime camping spots were already taken. Undeterred, we sought out a less crowded area to set up camp. The day unfolded with plenty of fun activities. By 6 p.m., everyone had gathered to cook and prepare for dinner. I took on the role of cook, but amidst the hustle, I noticed a friend dragging a long log for firewood. Although it struck me as odd, I didn't dwell on it and rushed to assist him, helping carry the log back to our tent. In Hmong culture, dragging a log to the campsite symbolizes leading the way for the afterlife to where the trail ends. As we sat down to eat, a sudden chill permeated the air, and the wind picked up in strength. A sense of unease settled over us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching us. Gathering my friends, I proposed the idea of leaving. Some agreed, while others hesitated. Despite the reluctance, as darkness descended and the wind intensified, we took a vote. 6 out of 8 of us agreed it was time to go, as we all felt the same eerie chill. Quickly packing up, I made a proclamation to my friends before we departed, declaring that the place was not suitable for camping and suggested that we find another spot further down the road. With that, we all piled into our cars and began our journey back to the city. Yet, as we descended from the mountains, an ominous presence seemed to follow us, casting a shadow over our journey until we neared the city limits. According to the local shamans, it was believed that we had offended the guardian spirit of the land when my friend dragged the log to our campsite. This, they said, was why we felt pursued as we left, chased away by the dark energy. In July or August of 2011, we went camping around Wisconsin, specifically at Yellowstone Lake State Park. Despite the elders' warning to avoid places with roads and little paths, we ventured out anyway. It all began on the first day when everything seemed fine. We swam, hung out, went fishing, and, of course, told scary stories. On the second day, we engaged in various activities and stayed up until 3 a.m., the infamous devil's time as some call it. While many may scoff at such superstitions, I've always believed in ghosts. We were a group of 7 or 8 people, including my little brother, who was following one of my friends along a walking trail at night. As I remained at the campsite with 4 others, my brother was playing ninja with them. Suddenly, I spotted my friend returning with his companions, which sent shivers down my spine. It felt as if something was watching me. And then, out of nowhere, my brother was forcefully pushed by an unseen entity, propelling him about 6 feet. We yelled at him, but fear took hold, especially when my aunt, who was a shaman, sensed a spirit nearby. Terrified, we hastily packed up and retreated to the safety of a rest area. Later, we mustered the courage to return, and my aunt gave my brother a knife for protection, instructing him to keep it close. However, when we checked later, the knife had vanished, despite no one admitting to moving it. Frightened, we abandoned our campsite until morning and hastily departed in separate cars, equipped with walkie-talkies for communication. During the drive, we heard screams and witnessed a friend being seemingly possessed, his voice altered as if inhabited by a malevolent force. As if that weren't enough, the car behind us experienced a sudden malfunction, only to mysteriously start again after we sped off at 90 miles per hour. Voices filled our car and the walkie-talkies, telling us that we'll die that very day. We drove recklessly until reaching the highway, where a police officer promptly issued us a ticket. Upon arriving in Madison, my uncle, obsessed with finding the missing knife, had a dream revealing its location in a garbage bag. Acting on this premonition, he directed his friend to the bag, and to everyone's surprise, the knife was indeed in the garbage bag. After this experience, we had to hooplee for each and every one of us, and it marked my first encounter with the paranormal. So, my family, friends, and I decided to go camping. As darkness fell and rain began to pour, we found ourselves engaged in card games and board games, while the moms took care of their own activities and the dads went fishing. I recall there being a total of 22 people, including 6 parents and 16 kids. Let me describe where all the kids were hiding from the rain. We were at a park that often hosts birthday parties and provides free electricity. The boys brought their Xbox consoles to play games like Black Ops Zombies, while others brought their laptops. It was amazing how we all got to enjoy the activities that we loved. Wow, they really brought TVs and consoles? As the clock struck 1 o'clock, we collectively decided to watch a horror movie, The Tunnel. During the movie, I swear I saw something darting quickly in black attire. I asked everyone in the group if they had seen what I saw. Some confirmed that they had, while others dismissed it, attributing it to tiredness. But I knew what I had seen. After watching The Tunnel, we all retired for the night. My cousin, a girl, my little sister, and I slept outside, while the others slept in the tent. Once again, I saw the figure. I shut my eyes tightly, only to find it getting closer each time I opened them. Terrified, I clutched my little sister's hand, who was 8 years old at the time, following the elder's advice that holding a young child's hand would ward off malevolent spirits. I didn't care whether she was a baby or not, I just wanted to feel safe. I silently prayed for everyone's safety through the night. It was my first time camping in what would be considered a haunted place. Rumors circulated about a haunted house surrounded by a swamp, reminiscent of the movie Hatchet. During daylight, we even ventured to take a look, sending shivers down my spine. Another tale circulated about a girl drowning in the pool's deep end, which was about half a mile long. My cousin claimed that while fishing, she and another person witnessed an ape-like creature leap into the lake, causing a massive splash. Though some were skeptical, they all saw the water disturbance. The next day, despite my fear, we went swimming. I avoided the deep end at all costs, and fortunately, nothing happened to me. A long time ago, myself and 13 other friends, both guys and girls, embarked on a camping trip down south, about an hour or two away from Appleton. As is customary with such outings involving young adults, we brought along a few cases and bottles of alcohol. The first night was shaping up to be a memorable one. We were having a great time chatting, setting up our tents, and building a sizable bonfire. Around 9 o'clock, as darkness descended, one of my friends suggested that we share ghost stories. 5 of them recounted tales of Hmong vampires, while I contributed a story about ghosts with twisted lower halves, something like the Kongoi. I mentioned that such entities exist in America as well. After the storytelling session, I had the not-so-bright idea of playing a game of Ghost in the Graveyard. All 13 of us, having indulged in some drinking, were feeling a bit buzzed. I volunteered to be the ghost and set off to find the others with my flashlight. Every few minutes, I located one of them until we were all gathered near the camp. We counted heads and confirmed that all 12 of us were present. Just as we were making our way back to the fire, a girl emerged from the forest, shouting, I won, you didn't find me." We were all taken aback, and I assured her that I indeed found everyone. She seemed surprised too. When asked if we had counted heads, I replied affirmatively, explaining that that was why we stopped. That's when we noticed something chilling. The girl who hadn't walked back to the campsite had her lower half twisted backwards. We screamed in horror and quickly scrambled into our car, speeding off into the night. Since that terrifying incident, we never dared to go camping again or share ghost stories. A week later, one of the guys fell seriously ill, prompting his family to perform a unexplained ceremony. The shaman revealed that my friend's spirit had been taken away by a girl with whom he had made a promise with in a past life. However, after negotiation, the girl allowed him to return. When I was growing up as a kid, my aunties, uncles, and grandparents would often take me and my cousins on fishing trips and camping outings. I distinctly recall the days when we would venture to El Dorado National Forest or Yosemite for our camping adventures. During these trips, I often overheard the elders discussing a haunted campsite nestled within one of the national forests that I mentioned. They spoke of a tragic tale where a young lady was assaulted and murdered. It was believed that her spirit was haunting the site, tormenting anyone who dared to camp there. One day, while camping with friends, the night grew cold and quiet as everyone retired to their tents or cars to rest. That's when strange occurrences began to unfold. You see, when you're out camping, it's common to be armed and to have a dog for protection. At some point, amidst the pitch-black darkness and eerie silence, I felt a palpable shift in the air, as if something ominous were about to happen. Feeling frightened, I woke up my grandmother and asked her to accompany me to the bathroom. As we emerged from the tent, we noticed one of the girls still sitting outside. My grandmother advised her to put away the food to prevent bears from being attracted. In hindsight, it seemed odd for someone to be outside alone in the cold and darkness. After returning from the woods, we heard sobbing coming from a nearby campsite, which immediately reminded me of the stories that the elders had shared out about the haunted site where the young lady met her tragic end. Fear gripped my heart as I realized our campsite wasn't far from where the murder had occurred. Back in our tent, I lay frozen with fear as I heard footsteps outside. Initially, I thought it might be my cousins, but as the shadow passed by, the air turned icy cold. The sound of sobbing filled the night, and I found myself paralyzed with terror. I knew that acknowledging the presence of a ghost only fueled its power. The shadow loomed closer, and I could do nothing but silently pray for it to vanish. I huddled under my blanket, repeating, "Go away," in a desperate plea. Eventually, the silence returned, but it was a chilling stillness that enveloped the air. When daylight finally broke through the treetops, I summoned the courage to wake my grandmother and share my ordeal. To my surprise, my cousins, aunties, and uncles all had their own unsettling experiences to recount. One cousin, sleeping in the Suburban with the dog, felt a sense of unease as the dog growled at an unseen presence outside the window. He too heard the sobbing and saw a shadowy figure pass by, accompanied by a bone-chilling coldness. Another auntie described a terrifying dream where she ran through dark, frigid woods with the sound of sobbing echoing behind her. My uncle reported being pelted with rocks outside his car before feeling an inexplicable shaking, accompanied by the haunting sobs. It's a truly chilling experience, and if you're skeptical, I urge you to visit the site yourself. If you do decide to explore, tread carefully and remember to not bring her spirit home with you. Last year, after a camping trip in southern Minnesota, I found myself immersed in a week-long encounter with the paranormal. Coming from a family with a strong belief in shamanism, which involves interactions with the afterlife, I initially thought that I could handle such experiences easily. Little did I know what awaited me. During our camping trip, as the sun dipped below the horizon, fireflies began to twinkle in the darkness. Behind our campsite lay a trail where fireflies fluttered closest to the ground. My cousins and I, eager to catch them, ventured out, but my younger cousins, apprehensive of the dark, hesitated. Determined to be brave, I set out to capture a few for them. Upon catching one, I heard their cheerful cheers prompting me to rush back. However, my joy was short-lived as I heard another voice calling me from afar. As the evening wore on and we gathered around the campfire, a sense of unease began to creep over me, despite being surrounded by family. Even as others retired for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of a presence lingering nearby. Eventually, it was just me and 4 of my cousins left around the dwindling fire. One cousin decided to go relieve themselves, but when I saw him nearby moments later, I called out, only to realize that he was right beside me. Bewildered, I turned back to the figure I had seen, only to find it had vanished. Though unnerved, my upbringing in a shaman family instilled a sense of calm within me. I kept the incident to myself, knowing others would dismiss it as a paranoia or a trick of the mind. As night descended and we settled in for sleep, I shared my experiences with my 2 cousins my age, Brian and Timmy. My revelation sent shivers down their spines, causing them to quickly drift off to sleep, leaving me the last awake. In the dead of night, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air, jolting all of us awake. Timmy and I, startled, exchanged worried glances, attributing the sound to our older cousin's song. Refusing to succumb to cliches, we opted not to investigate further and attempted to resume our sleep. The next morning, Song denied any recollection of screaming, but Timmy and I confirmed that we had heard it too. However, our family brushed it off, attributing it to a demonic presence, failing to understand the gravity of our experiences. The rest of the camping trip passed uneventfully until the journey home, when inexplicable symptoms plagued me. Fatigue, perspiration, and trembling gripped me despite feeling otherwise healthy. Upon reaching home, I confided in my parents about the night of the fireflies, only to be met with dismissal. Determined to find solace, I reached out to Song, hoping for reassurance. Yet his response echoed my parents, dismissing my fears as baseless. Struggling to rationalize my experiences, I recalled a lesson from my uncle, a shaman, about seeking protection from monsters. With his words echoing in my mind, I eventually drifted into a fitful sleep. In the dead of night, I found myself in a lucid nightmare surrounded by a haunting vision of death and despair. Upon awakening, I was consumed by fear and sought refuge in my uncle's guidance. After I told him what happened, he confirmed my suspicions. A vengeful spirit had attached itself to me. Determined to rid me of this malevolent presence, my uncle performed a ritual. He had to uneng for me using ancient traditions and his shamanistic tools. I had to sit in front of an altar on a bench while he performed his rituals. After some time, the ritual was concluded. My uncle lifted the red cloth that covered his face and assured me that the spirit had been banished. At the end, he left me with a protective necklace to ward off future encounters. This story unfolded a few years ago in the rural outskirts of the Twin Cities, Minnesota. Annually, our student organization embarks on a camping trip to a secluded site, where we immerse ourselves in the great outdoors and engage in various outdoors activities. A highlight of our camping excursion is the Odyssey event, organized by the organization's alumni. Each year, they select a territory, define the boundaries, and orchestrate the course. This nocturnal event aims to replicate the harrowing journey of Hmong people fleeing to Thailand, navigating through dark woods while evading capture by the Blalia, who were the alumni. My cousin, a participant in the camping trip, eagerly joined the Odyssey challenge. The terrain for that year's event proved formidable, requiring participants to scale and maneuver through the rugged woodland terrain, taking cover when necessary. In the dead of night, halfway through the course, my cousin commenced his ascent up a hill towards the campsite. As he climbed, he sensed a presence in his periphery. Glancing over, he was startled to encounter the figure of an Indian man ascending the hill alongside him, fixing him with an unwavering gaze. Startled, my cousin sprinted towards the hilltop with all of his might. Ultimately, he completed the course, but the encounter left him baffled. The chosen campsite was rumored to be Native American land, adding an eerie layer to the experience. Another camper recounted a similar experience during the Odyssey event, citing a Native American figure traversing the woods and locking eyes with him. Indeed, the cover of darkness often unveils the most mysterious occurrences. The disturbance within this particular campsite seemed to awaken the spirits that lingered within those ancient woods. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Goodbye. The encounters I will be sharing will be in sections that had happened to me to lead up to the attachment. In 2019, I graduated high school and went to college 2 hours away from my home. I was so excited and happy to be far, yet close enough to go back home if needed be. Little did I know how bad things would turn out for me. It always started small, so I always brushed them off as my imagination and to stop overthinking. Being that I grew up in a shaman household and having some abilities, I've always been sensitive, occasionally seeing things and only being able to communicate through dreams. Some people probably won't believe this, but I know what I saw, heard, and have experienced. Moving into this college was great. I had some friends from high school who also came to the same college, and I made some friends online. I felt more excited than scared, which I thought would be a great thing. A couple of months in, I did not experience anything much until one night. I was in my room alone, just laying in bed, listening to music. I laid in the dark on my phone texting my boyfriend at the time when I heard a noise in the room. My room had carpet, and it was like the standard short carpet that schools and office buildings would have. It was really rough, and walking on it, you could hear every little noise. After hearing that sound, I sat up, looking around, thinking that my roommate might have came in. But when I looked around the dark room, there was nothing. Shrugging it off, I laid back down. Then, the noise happened again. It sounded like someone's fingernail or toenails were purposely gliding along the carpet slowly. I sat up again, even more confused. I turned on my phone flashlight and quickly walked to the door and opened it to see if my friends came by. Perhaps they thought it was funny to scare me. But when I opened it, no one was there. I closed the door, but just stood by it, turning off my light to attempt to catch my friends. Then, the noise happened again. I swung the door open so fast, but there was no one or nothing out there. I closed the door and began to walk to my bed, but only made it 2 steps away. That's when it happened again, but this time, coming from my roommate's closet. I turned around as fast as I could and flipped the light switch on, hoping that it was just a mouse or something running around my room. But nothing. A little sketched out, I just ignored it entirely, not wanting to scare myself anymore. I put on my headphones and turned up my music really loud. I decided that some homework would be best to distract me from it, so I started to do my research paper. Some time had passed and I started to get tired. As I began to put my things away, I felt a cold hand on my shoulders as if someone was trying to hold me down in my seat. What the hell? I thought to myself as I turned. Why are you touching me like that? Expecting to see my roommate, but no one was there. I felt my heart drop. I turned around and closed my laptop and quickly grabbed my stuff to wash up. As I was about to leave, my roommate walked into the door. "Hey, did you just get out of class?" I questioned. "Yeah, today and Wednesday will be my late days. Starting today, I have one class at an off-site building." I nodded in response. "Okay, well, I'm gonna wash up," smiling as I walked away. Still feeling a little scared, I cautiously walked to the bathroom. The bathrooms always scared me. They looked pale yellow and resembled a hospital. On the left, there were 2 shower stalls, and on the right, there was a long mirror with 4 sinks and 2 bathroom stalls. There was also a full-body mirror on the wall by the door. The lighting wasn't the best. It amplified the yellow walls even more. I called my boyfriend to video chat since I got scared from earlier. Why are they chatting in the bathroom? We chatted for a few seconds when he said, "Oh, someone just came in. I can call you later." I told him to stop playing around. As I looked around me, no one came in. It was literally just me in there. The doors to the bathrooms are heavy, so when they close, they always make a noise to which I did not hear. My boyfriend then stated that he saw someone wearing a light blue dress. I told him to stop talking, and I quickly packed up my stuff and left. By the time I walked into my room, my roommate was dead asleep. I quietly put my stuff away and laid in bed. It was around 1:40 a.m., so I hung up with my boyfriend and attempted to sleep. That's when I heard the scratching noises again. My eyes shot open. I started to panic a bit, and I could feel my heart beating faster and faster. It started to scratch louder and louder and faster as it came towards me. I tried to sit up in bed. That's when I knew I was having sleep paralysis. I wanted to cry. I tried to wake myself up, but nothing happened. I tried to stay calm when I looked down towards my roommate's closet. Sitting on the floor, her torso and upper body was leaned down, almost as if she was sleeping on her stomach, her head touching the carpet facing the end of my bed. Her legs were strangely bent, making the letter M, but her body was inside in between her legs. Her arms were so long, and her nails were even longer. They were slowly gliding across the floor. I watched as her fingernails slightly vibrated from sliding across the carpet, making that scraping sound I have been hearing. I heard her gasp, "Help! Help me!" I watched in disbelief. She slowly started to sit up, then stand up while repeating, "Help me! Help!" With each "help me" getting more and more aggressive. By the time she was standing, she was hunched over the ceiling as she was too tall. Her long arms pointed straight at me, those long nails nearly reaching me. She looked almost like the character from the movie Mama. "Help! Help me!" She screeched one last time before lunging at me. I gasped as her weight was over me, and it was unbearable. I felt as if I was going to die from being crushed. I pleaded for it to stop. I pleaded and pleaded to no end. Closing my eyes out of fear, I could feel her hair touching my face. I smelled a wet, old, moldy smell, and at my last breath, I pleaded to my grandma to help me. And within seconds, I sat up in bed in a sweat. I was out of breath, still trying to collect myself. My heart was pounding so hard and loud. I felt like any faster, it would stop. This nightmare was so vivid, I could still feel my face tingling from where her hair was touching my face. I eventually relaxed, and before going to bed, I texted my friend to see if she wanted to get some lunch after our class. I woke up at around 9:30 a.m. and I got ready to go get breakfast at the cafeteria. My friend, let's call her Mai, she was busy, so we planned for dinner. Fast forward to dinner with my friend. Mai's dad was a shaman, so she had many experiences growing up. We were cooking in her dorm's kitchen when she mentioned she had an odd dream last night. I quickly added, "Really? Me too." She looked up at me in disbelief. "No, I really did. I've never had a dream like this before," I said while stirring the contents in the pan, trying to not look scared. We eventually started to tell each other our dreams, and they were almost identical. At this point, we were eating on the couches near the door. Mai's room had a bunk bed and she slept on the top. Mai said, "In my dream, I was laying in my bed and I kept on hearing this scratching noise coming from my door. But I didn't see anyone's shadow or shoes from under the door. I thought it was just my imagination, so I went back to laying down and going on my phone. That's when I kept on hearing the scratching noises. Irritated, I looked again at the door, but nothing. Then I heard it from my closet at the end of my bed. So I turned to look, and that's when I saw it. She was tall with long arms and really long nails, and she pointed at me, yelling, 'Help me, help me.' I woke up because my mom was calling me, and I told her about my dream. She told my dad. He said a chant over the phone to protect me. I then told Mai about my dream, and the both of us just sat in disbelief. That's when I started to feel really uncomfortable, as if someone else was in the room with us. I heard a slight, as if someone was tapping their nails on a table. Mai was talking to me about something, but I was distracted and kept looking behind her. "What? What is it?" Mai said. Nothing, just some people walking by the window," as I nervously laughed. She shrugged her shoulders and kept talking. That's when I looked behind her again, and the roll of napkins flew from the middle of the table to the floor, making a loud noise. Mai jumped up and ran. Stunned, I ran after her, screaming, "You were just going to leave me?" We ran all the way to her dorm room and stayed in there for probably 10 minutes before we had the courage to go back down and collect her belongings. This was one of the things that happened to me while I was at that school. Many small things would begin to happen that led up to my attachment, but I ended up leaving the school for a personal reason. It wasn't until my aunt, who also went to that school, said some strange things to me when she came to visit. I went to a tiny college in a small town. The college is pretty isolated from the town itself. It's also surrounded with trails and small patches of forests. This happened when I was a first year in college. My cousin, who is a year younger than me, decided to come visit me. She was interested in my school and wanted to come tour and do an overnight stay. She came during my finals week, which wasn't ideal, but it fit her schedule. She got a tour of my school, and I showed her some of my favorite spots on campus. I told her that since it was finals season, I had to get some studying done. I usually only study in the library because I get distracted very easily, so I told her I was going to go to the library. My cousin didn't want to stay with my roommate, and she had homework to do as well, so we packed our bags and headed to the library. I felt bad for her, so I bought a bunch of snacks and drinks from the campus convenience store, and we went to the library. When we got to the library, my favorite study spots were occupied. If you're a college student, then you know that there's always that one spot you like to study in. Luckily, our library is huge. We found a study space in the top floor of the library. It was around 11 p.m., so even with the big windows, it was pretty dim. The entire section of our area was empty except for the two of us. I usually studied on the main floor where there was a lot more people whenever I studied late into the evening. I'm usually a very paranoid person, but I wasn't scared because my cousin was with me. I sat at the table and she sat on the couch. At first, we were loud and chatty, so we didn't feel the ominous atmosphere, but we eventually quieted down and focused on our work. I could hear noises, but it wasn't like the library was completely empty, so I didn't think much of it. At around 1 a.m., my cousin had finished all the snacks and drinks I bought her and needed to use the bathroom. It was straight down the long hallway, but she wanted me to go with her. It wasn't weird to me because girls always go to the bathroom together, so we went. Most parts of the library has sensor lights, so if an area doesn't detect movement for about 30 minutes, then it turns off. However, these lights are very sensitive in my experience. As long as I fidgeted in my seat, the sensor would detect me and not turn off. My cousin and I were being obnoxious in the bathroom because she needed to poop, and I was making fun of her. After being poop shy for about 5 minutes, she gave up and we headed out. All the lights were turned off. We were the only ones left on the floor because the lights in the other sections turned off except for ours. When we walked to the bathroom, we triggered all the lights, but when we came out, the only lights on were the hallway lights. I felt a shiver down my spine. "Do they turn off the lights at 1 a.m.?" she asked. "I don't know. I've only been on the main floor. I've studied until the library closed before, and this never happened," I answered. "Well, when does the library close?" she asked. 3 a.m., I responded. "But I'm not sure. Maybe they turn off the lights around 1 a.m. on the other floors since it's not the main floor," I tried to explain. However, I've never studied on this floor to confirm that theory. My cousin just nodded and we proceeded to our study spot. Luckily, the lights turned back on as we walked and triggered them. I kept studying and my cousin started to pack up. "Let me know when you're ready. I'm done studying," she said. She played on her phone while I kept on studying. We sat in silence for about 40 minutes until we heard a library cart being pushed around. I shot a look at my cousin. I looked around and our lights were the only ones on. Okay, there has to be something wrong with these lights, I thought to myself. I tried to continue to look at my papers. The cart was being pushed closer and closer to us. I picked up my laptop and sat next to her. As soon as I did that, the cart stopped. Crap, did whatever it was see me? Suddenly, the big double doors to enter the library creaked open. These double doors led to the main stairs that would be taken down to the main floor. Did whatever it was leave? I didn't know whether to be relieved or scared. I quietly packed up my stuff. "Let's go," I whispered. My cousin and I walked towards the door. We were about 20 feet away from the door when we saw the door being slowly pushed open. I looked at my cousin and she pulled me behind a bookshelf. The door opened a fourth of the way and quickly slammed shut. I was frightened in that moment and I couldn't even scream. My cousin was scared too, but she's a rising shaman, so it's safe to assume that she wasn't as terrified as I was. I think whatever was there could sense how scared I was and began messing with us. The door started opening and closing. It wasn't like in the scary movies where it dramatically opened and closed. The doors have the big horizontal push bars, and you have to push those bars in order to get out. I hope that makes sense. Anyways, that bar was being pushed, and the door would open ever so slightly and close again. Then, we heard footsteps slowly walk up and down the main aisle. Up and down. Stop. Up and down. And stop again. Then, we heard running around the entire floor. It sounded like whatever they were taunting us, running up and down the aisles. I started to tear up because I was so scared. This continued on for about 5 minutes. At this point, I was pissed off. It was 2 a.m. and I was scared and tired. My cousin took out a red triangle pouch and handed it to me. She left our hiding spot and walked straight toward the door, leaving me behind. As soon as she walked, I ran behind her and noticed the door immediately stopped moving. She pushed the door and we walked out. I've never walked down the stairs that fast in my entire life. As we were walking to my dorm, my cousin pulled my arm and said, Let's not take that way." "Why? It's shorter. I just want to get to bed," I said. "Trust me," she said. I trusted her, so we walked a different route. When we got to my room, we didn't even shower. We went to go brush our teeth together and slept. Before we went to sleep, my cousin told me to hang the red triangle pouch on my door handle. That night, I had a dream about a girl. She was dressed in a white gown. She looked humanly, but with pale skin. She didn't look scary, but she felt scary. In my dream, she was knocking on my door, but I didn't recognize her, so I didn't let her in. "I know you're in there. Open the door. I need your help," she whispered. I sat on my bed and the knocking continued. "Go away," I yelled. I laid in my bed and turned my head toward the window and saw a horrible image of the girl. Her face was swollen, gray, burnt, and bloody. Her tongue stuck out and her hair was raggedy. She was furious, breathing heavily. She looked through my window and launched right toward me. That's when I woke up in a cold sweat. I started to cry. It was already 9 a.m. and my roommate was gone. She worked at 8 a.m. on Saturdays. Luckily, my cousin was sleeping on the floor and woke up to the sound of my scream. I explained my dream to her. She told me about the incident that we encountered the night before. "Your school is haunted as hell," she said. She told me that I had a weak spirit. I get scared easily, which makes me an easy target, but I was especially vulnerable because my spirit was extra weak. It was probably due to the stress of college and finals and the lack of eating and sleeping. She told me that she felt like something was off when we found our study spot, but she thought that maybe it was a Friday and a lot of people didn't want to study that night. When she asked to go to the bathroom, she didn't want to leave me alone. That's why she told me to go with. Then, she asked me something that spooked me even more. "Do you guys store cadavers here?" Yeah, not frequently, but I think they got new cadavers for finals. For those of you who don't know, cadavers are dead bodies that are donated for medical practices. We have a lot of pre-med students who work with cadavers. Remember when I told you to take another route last night? Well, I wanted to avoid the building that stored them. I could feel them there. Don't walk there anymore. The building that they stored the cadavers in was right next to the library. I didn't even know and have walked past that building so many nights. I don't think the dream was for you. I think they were trying to get to me, but I was protected, so she came to you. She couldn't get through the door because of the pouch. That's why she went to your window. "I'm gonna need a pouch for my window too," was all I could say to her. She also told me she felt other ghostly presences around me because I was so weak. They wanted to weaken my spirit and possess me. Good thing I didn't take off my red strings. I was curious about the encounter in the library, so I searched it up. There was a whole thread of students talking about their experience in the library, specifically on that floor. No wonder there wasn't any students up there. I don't know exactly what happened to cause that paranormal activity, but everyone talked about the library cart noise. Apparently, a librarian had a heart attack while on the job, and her ghost still haunts the library. Needless to say, I transferred out of there after my first year because I just couldn't handle walking around campus at night after that. Good thing I'm a bad student and I don't study. Anyways, thank you for listening. Subscribe. When my mother gave birth to my younger sister, I was still living and working in the next state over. As soon as I heard the news, I rushed back home. By the time I got to the hospital, visiting hours were over. I explained to the nurse my situation, and after a lot of persuasion, she told me how to get to my mother's room. She said that my father was sleeping over in the room with my mom. Follow the yellow line. When you pass 2 hallways to your right, there will be a staircase to your left. It's an emergency exit staircase, but it's the easiest way to get to your mom's room. Go up one flight and your mom's room will be the third room to the left of the door 216. And don't go straying off now neither. I don't want you getting hurt or lost. These hallways sucked. Yes, they were lit well, but they were empty. I walked slowly, following the yellow line. I have this belief that if I get scared and start walking faster, whatever it is I'm scared of will know and get stronger. I got to the first hallway on my right. I saw a nurse walking towards me. Relieved, I waved at her. She gave me a smile and walked into one of the patient's rooms. As I turned to continue my walk, someone calls to me. Young man, have you seen the nurse?" asked the old woman from the end of the hallway. I nodded and walked over to her. She just went into one of these rooms. Sorry, I don't know which one, but I can check for you. Oh, that's fine. I can find her myself, she insisted. I convinced her at least to let me walk with her to keep her company. I told her about my mom having just given birth and how excited I was. She smiled and we both checked each of the rooms. Some of the patients were still awake and we waved hello to her friends. We reached the last of the rooms and still did not find the nurse. At this point, I was a little creeped out. My only thought was, ghost, ghost, ghost. I offered to walk the woman back to her room and she agreed. She must have been pretty scared herself. When we got near her room, she thanked me and walked in. I quickly turned, briskly walked back to my end of the hallway and headed to my destination. The next morning, my dad and I decided to walk over to Burger King and grab some breakfast. On the way down, we passed the hallway where I met the old lady. There were construction workers and the maintenance men all over it. Dad, you know what's going on? I asked. They're renovating this side of the hospital. They've been working on it for months. So, no one is in these rooms? No way, it's a construction site now. No one is allowed over there. Oh my god, the people that they met were ghost. While in high school, I volunteered at a hospital called Bethesda. I've done supply, biomedical technician assistance, and lastly, concierge during my 2 years of volunteering. Nothing ever happened. It was usually a nice place. However, one winter night around Christmas time, most people went home. As I was finishing up my homework, I got bored and decided to go to the lower lobby since I've already finished all the reading materials on the main floor. I went down the stairs on the other side of the floor. When I got to the lobby, most of the lights have already gone out due to inactivity. Minding my own business, I walked into the lobby area to get the reading materials. Suddenly, the elevators opened up. However, when I looked inside expecting to see somebody, it was empty. Seeing no one, my heart beat so fast. It even got worse when the light at the hallway where I walked in from turned off automatically. I ran to open the elevator and pressed the main floor button as fast as I could, closed my eyes, and ran out of the elevator as soon as it landed. This happened to an aunt of mine, told to me by my mother. My mother was a shaman that tied a string on her and blessed her. I don't know which hospital this aunt was in, but I know she is from Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Anyways, my aunt had just given birth to her twins, and so she was feeling a bit restless. Something went wrong with her eyes. I don't remember exactly what, but her eyes were secreting a mucus-like liquid, so the doctors ordered for her to stay at the hospital so that they could monitor her and the twins. After a few nights, when the doctors came in to check on her in her room, they found her sitting on a cushioned chair with all the lights on. They told her that it wasn't good for the eyes and that she needed to lay in bed and rest. My aunt went back and laid in bed but requested that the doctors leave the lights on. They told her that they wouldn't because it would just make her eyes worse. The next night, the nurses found her sitting in the same spot with all the lights on like the previous night. Again, they guided her to her bed for her to rest, and she requested for them to leave the lights on. She then added, "Please, leave the lights on. They keep poking my eyes." But the nurses thought that she was delusional and left her to rest while dimming the lights as they walked out the door. Later that week, my parents went to visit her and her babies in the hospital. She told my mom what was going on when everyone wasn't in the room with her. She said, "Every night, when everyone leaves the room, there would be this black figure of a woman and two little things with her. She forces me out of bed because she says it's hers. If I didn't get up, the two little things would either tickle my feet or poke my eyes. I had no choice but to sleep on the chair or somewhere else." My aunt then asked if my mom could perform a spell to fix her eyes with any sort of magic. This spell involved my mom blowing her breath on the eyes of my aunt. After a few days, her eyes were well enough to be discharged from the hospital. When she got home, her eyes stopped secreting the liquid, and she also says that she doesn't see the entities anymore. Let me start by saying that I currently work at a hospital. My job title has since changed, but I used to go from floor to floor reviewing charts, making sure everything is correct and in the right place. It's a simple job, but the complicated part was that I worked the night shift from 11 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. There are 6 different units in the hospital that I would have to make it to. Some are just next to each other, but others were quite a ways. As I was leaving one unit to the next, I would have to walk down a long hall. This hall is dimly lit at night, with windows not to the outside, but to the office buildings that are closed, so if you looked inside, it's pitch black. As I was walking halfway down the hall, in a space in between the walls was a little girl playing on the ground. She was facing the wall, so I couldn't see her face. She was humming, playing like she had an imaginary car on the floor. My first impression was that she was a visitor with family and decided to leave the patient's room to play quietly. So I asked her who she was here with and who she came to see. The little girl didn't answer me, nor did she turn around to even look at me. So I asked her again, asking for her name, hoping that I can go to the nurse's station to inform them about a missing girl. Again, she didn't say anything. This time, I thought I'd just go back to the unit and inform the nurses because it was getting already late. I took about 10 steps back towards the unit when I stopped and realized that maybe I should just take the little girl with me. I went back to where she was playing, but she was gone. The hall is a long way in both directions, and the space was only big enough for a child to play with. This was when all the hairs on the back of my neck raised. I quickly paced back to the unit and asked if there were still any visitors left. That's when they told me that the last visitors left over 2 hours ago. I used to work at a hospital. It was an old 3-story building and it had a basement where it used to be a morgue. Anyways, the hospital was once owned by the Catholic Church. The nuns were coming through the hospital quite frequently, but now the building is owned by the Adventist Church. Some of the nuns used to work here a long time ago, and some even died in this very hospital. Even patients would tell the nurses that they would see a nun come to give them communion. They swore up and down and were adamant that they have seen the nun. Sometimes the room lights would just come on by itself when there were no patients in the room. The toilets would flush by itself. Lights in the old ICU would come on by itself. The TV would turn on and the volume would be turned up high. After we would turn off the TV and lights, a few minutes later, it would come back on. One of the janitors who worked the night shift said that he was cleaning the floors down in the basement because it was being converted into a clinic, lab, and storage. He saw a ball rolling down the hall. He went to check and saw a little girl walking into the waiting room. He thought there were still people down there, so he went to check, but when he went into the waiting room, there was no one there except a red ball. That janitor got spooked, and so he never worked night shifts at our hospital anymore. I told the story that some patients had seen the ghost of a nun at our hospital to my younger brother. My brother, John, is a big boy, about 300 pounds but a scaredy cat. John wasn't working or doing anything, so we made him go stay with my grandma because she was admitted into the hospital for CHF. One morning, when he was at the hospital, he saw a nun come out of a room and freaked out. John closed the door and went to sit by my grandma. When I came in to relieve John, he told me that he saw the nun. My little brother was terrified. I asked the nurses if they had seen a nun come visit a patient this morning. One of them said that Sister Rosa was here visiting a patient in room 202. I laughed to myself. I told John in the morning when he came to relieve me that the nun that he saw was a real person and not the ghost. My husband used to work at a hospital cafeteria on third shift. He hated it because he sees spirits and ghosts, but money was tight, so he stuck with that job until we were stable enough. One night, it was late and he was on his way to the basement to take out the trash. When he came around the corner, he saw an old Hmong man just standing there. Immediately, my husband began to get goosebumps. That old man looked pale and bluish. He told me that it was weird because patients shouldn't be down there. My husband then began to walk fast to the elevators and shouted in Hmong to the old man, "This is only the basement. You shouldn't be down here." He then turned back to get a look before going into the elevators. However, when he turned around, the old man was gone. I found this chilling story on the net and wanted to share. My spine is still tingling. My creepiest and scariest ghost story for me happened about a year ago. It was really more of a possession than a ghost story. I was helping another nurse with a patient that had lived a very hard life. He had numerous things going on with him, from cardiac to renal failure. You name it, he had it all going on. This man was very much afraid to die. Every time his heart monitor beeped, he would just go into a rage, screaming, "Don't let me die, don't let me die." It wasn't until later on that the other nurse and I found out why he didn't want to die. It was about 2 a.m. when his cardiac monitor started alarming the VTech. We both rushed into the room. I'm pulling the crash cart behind me. When I get to the room, the other nurse is completely white. This man was sitting about 2 inches above the bed and was laughing. His whole look completely changed. His eyes just had a look of pure evil in them, and he had this evil smile on his face. He laughed at us and said, "You aren't going to let me die, will you?" And he laughed again. We were both kind of frozen. I reached up and hit the code blue button, and when I did, the man went into VFib. He crashed back onto the bed. We started coding him, but after 20 minutes, it was called. 5 minutes after the code was called, several of the code team was in the room cleaning up when this man sits straight up in the bed and says, "You let him die? Too bad." And then he starts laughing uncontrollably. Then he collapsed back into bed. We heard a horrible, agonizing scream. Every single person in that unit, including the patients and nurses, heard that scream. Then you could hear someone say, "Don't let me die, don't let me die," being whispered throughout the entire unit. All of the nurses that night were pale and scared. Nobody went anywhere by themselves. By the next morning, the whispers were gone. The night shift nurses had a prayer service in the break room before we all left for home, and then we all had nightmares for weeks. I found this story off a website. In Korea, when a patient is taken to a hospital, a white wristband is placed on their left arm. These wristbands contain the patient's name and information. When a patient dies, a red wristband is placed on their right arm, and he or she are taken to the morgue. In one particular hospital in Korea, a young doctor was working the night shift. It was around 2 a.m. when he had finished his last operation. He was on the 5th floor and pressed the button for the elevator. The doctor was tired after a long day and was looking forward to the end of his shift. At 2 a.m., the hospital was very quiet. Most of the patients were asleep, and many of the nurses had already gone home. He entered the elevator, and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with the woman while the elevator descended. The elevator stopped at the basement, and the door opened. They saw an old man dressed in a white gown standing there. The old man was about to get in when the doctor suddenly slammed the close button and punched the button for the 5th floor. "Why did you do that?" asked the astonished woman. "I've performed a lot of operations," replied the doctor. "I've seen a lot of people die. When a patient dies, they get a red wristband placed on their arm." The woman was silent. "You saw it, didn't you?" said the doctor. That old man had a red wristband on his arm." "A red wristband?" said the woman as she raised her right arm. "You mean like this one?" I work as a nurse at a hospital. One night, as we were winding down after our shift, chatting among ourselves, we noticed a homeless man wandering down the hall. Initially, we didn't think much of it and informed the unit clerk, who promptly called security to investigate. When the security guard arrived, we directed him to where we had seen the homeless man, but he couldn't find anyone. Perplexed, I decided to check the rooms myself. As I made my way back to the nurse's station, I noticed a television on in an unoccupied room. Curious, I entered the room, but it was empty. After turning off the TV, I returned to the nurse's station to ask if anyone had been in room 11. To my surprise, everyone denied having been in there. Later, one of the nurses attended to a terminally ill patient who eventually passed away from respiratory distress. After the family left and the morgue was called, a nursing assistant cleaning the deceased patient noticed a slight movement in the left arm. Alarmed, she alerted the nurse in charge. Upon examination, it was confirmed that the patient had indeed passed away, showing no signs of life. However, just as they were about to cover the patient, the left arm twitched. When they looked closer, they discovered a pacemaker, which explained the movement. As the nurse left the room, she spotted the homeless man exiting room 11. Concerned for both the patient's safety and the security of the hospital, she called security again and attempted to locate the homeless man. However, this man seemed to have vanished without a trace. The security guard went room to room and found nothing either. We were all concerned because it's not safe for a homeless person roaming in our hospital. All the nurses and nurses' aide searched the hospital and still no sign of the homeless man. Before embarking on hunting trips, many people scout their hunting areas to observe animal activity, aiming to enhance the chances of a successful hunt. About 7 or 8 years ago, my family and I traveled to Gunnison, Colorado to scout the area before our elk hunting trip. We identified a small valley that seemed promising for hunting, where 2 of my brothers could potentially hunt once the season began. This valley, approximately 50 yards wide, offered clear visibility, making it easy to spot anyone walking along its bottom. Upon parking at the top of the valley, my parents assigned my brother and I to descend on the left side while the rest of the family explored the right. They assured us that they'd circle right back after scouting the right side. As we descended, we split up midway to cover more ground. After about 30 minutes, my brother and I reached the valley bottom, losing sight of our parents and siblings. We began scouting for elk and noticed figures ahead of us. Despite our attempts to approach and communicate with them, they eluded us, continually moving behind trees. We presumed them to be our family, assuming that they had already explored the area to the right and circled back. Following the figures for about 100 yards, we decided to wait, believing our family would return. Positioned in a clearing in the valley center, we had a clear view of our surroundings. After about 20 minutes, our parents arrived from the direction we had come. Surprised, they questioned why we hadn't scouted the left side entirely. My brother and I were confused, and we explained our encounter with the mysterious figures. We then learned that our parents hadn't passed through that area yet. Concerned, we discussed the situation briefly before deciding to continue scouting. This time, we remained together as a family, hiking back uphill toward our cars. Upon returning to camp, we packed up and left. Reflecting on the incident, my parents expressed relief that we had stopped when we did, believing something had been attempting to lure us further. Even now, recalling that event sent chills down my spine and gives me goosebumps. I've heard this story from way back, and I've shared it with numerous people, always managing to spook them out, especially during camping trips. It's fall in the Midwest, with leaves turning beautiful red and yellow shades, ready to carpet the forest floor. A group of guys set out early on a deer hunting trip, each armed with a radio, venturing onto their individual paths. The group dynamics should work in their favor as they always split the kills among themselves. As the day starts to wane and still no deer in sight, they contemplate heading home early. Suddenly, one of the guys urgently signals to silence over the radio. The others hold their breath, sensing that their friend has spotted a deer. Without warning, the thunderous roar of a 7mm rifle echoes through the woods, followed by another shot. Over the crackling radio, his voice calmly confirms, "I think I got him." The shooter sets off to find his kill, while the rest make their way to assist. With the car a considerable hike away, mostly uphill, they anticipate needing to divide the load to carry it. It feels like a close call. They almost went home empty-handed. Radio chatter resumes as they exchange information on direction and speculate about the size of the kill. However, the shooter radios back, unable to locate the deer, and is still searching. In just 15 minutes, the group reunites. Darkness is descending, and flashlights will soon be necessary. They return to the shooter's location and head towards where the deer was shot. As they scour the area, they catch a faint sound. A few men pause to listen, trying to discern its origin. It resembles someone talking or singing. As they move further away from the site, the sound grows louder. Suddenly, they recognize it. A Hmong folk song, Gutia. Eyes widen, hearts pound, and then, abruptly, the singing stops. Shaken and scared, they decide to abandon the search for the deer. The thought of losing the kill fades. Their primary concern now is getting back to the safety of the car and heading home. Navigating through tall grass and dense shrubs proves challenging. Running is out of the question. They don't want to provoke anything to chase them. With darkness enveloping them, they retrieve their flashlights. Just as they turn to leave, their beams illuminate a dark figure amidst the grass beside an oak tree. They cautiously approach, hoping it's the deer. Yet, what they find leaves them breathless. A deer, dressed in Hmong clothes, lies before them. This story took place in September during the opening of squirrel hunting season. The day before the opening, we were all gathered at our camping spot, sitting around the bonfire as usual, sharing stories. One of our elders told us about a spot that was rumored to have many squirrels, but it was avoided because of supposed hauntings and strange experiences. Despite the warnings, our friend Jin, who was in his mid-40s, expressed his intention to hunt there since he had never seen any squirrels anywhere. The following day, everyone prepared to head out for squirrel hunting. When asked where he was going, Jin replied that he was going to go to Ghost Mountain. Then each of us went our separate ways. As morning approached, Jin spotted a dead squirrel and picked it up. Surprisingly, it still felt warm, with a bullet hole indicating that it had been recently shot. However, Jin hadn't heard any gunshots, and the squirrel hadn't fallen far from where he stood. He shrugged off the oddity and continued hunting, eventually finding a squirrel within shooting range. After he shot it, the squirrel fell nearby, but when he went to retrieve it, it had vanished. He followed the trail of blood and found the squirrel mysteriously returned to the spot. Resting by an apple tree, Jin felt a cold breeze and then had an apple thrown at him. Perplexed, he moved on. Later at a pond, he experienced the same breeze, followed by apples being thrown whenever squirrels approached. After firing a random shot out of frustration, he felt an even colder breeze and heard ominous noises as he fled. He encountered 2 other Hmong men on his way back to camp, and the strange occurrences ceased. Back at camp, Jin didn't share the details of his experience, only mentioning that he had seen a few squirrels. That night, he had a disturbing dream about an Indian man warning him never to return to the forest. The next day, Jin recounted his ordeal to us, and the elders advised him against shooting under such circumstances. Thankfully, he returned home safely, albeit shaken by the eerie events. This incident took place in Laos, where 2 friends ventured into the woods for a hunting trip. The elder, named B, instructed his younger companion Neng to circle the mountain while he took the opposite route, planning to meet up later. Neng agreed, and they both went their separate ways in search of game. While traversing the forest, Neng stumbled upon a shaded area with a large rock. Since the sun was at its peak, he decided to rest there for a while before continuing his journey. Drifting off to sleep, he was awakened by thumping noises. Opening his eyes, he peered downhill, only to be greeted by a terrifying sight. Standing before him was a woman tattered in Hmong clothes, her hair matted and her skin torn and bleeding, particularly on her face. Despite his fear, Neng tried to maintain composure and asked the woman where she was headed to. The woman responded in a haunting wail. "If you don't mind, I'm going home with you," she said. Neng, gripped by fear, concocted a lie, telling the woman to wait while he cleaned his house to make room for her. Agreeing, the woman sat on the rock as Neng sprinted home, where he tearfully recounted the encounter to his parents. Armed with a wooden knife, Neng's father marked the outside of the house to prevent the woman from entering. They decided to perform a traditional Waneng ceremony to ward off the spirit, but chose to wait for 2 days before doing so. Throughout those agonizing days, Neng heard the woman's voice calling out to him. After waiting for so long, the shaman finally arrived to perform the Waneng ceremony for Neng. From then on, his condition started to improve, prompting him to change his name and wear a red necklace for protection against future encounters. This story dates back to 2009 from a friend I met during a summer camp in 2012. It's based on a true experience, and every time she recounted it, it sent shivers down my spine. She explained it as so. It all began with my first camping trip with my family and friends, aimed at catching up on our busy lives. My brother Joe wasn't keen on the idea, not a fan of the wilderness, but I enticed him by mentioning that my friend, whom he had a crush on, would be joining us. The journey to our camping spot was long, and I found myself dozing off for most of it, feeling bored and weary. Upon arrival, Joe, despite his aversion to wilderness, was the first to step out, ensuring the safety of our campsite. Once we set up camp, tasks were assigned. The men ventured out for firewood while the women prepared dinner. As dusk descended, we gathered around the fire, sharing stories and bonding over barbecued meat. Around 11:30 p.m., I retired for the night, the first night passing without any incidents. The next morning, my early riser tendencies led me to assist the women in cooking. Meanwhile, the men set off for hunting and fishing, though Joe opted out, choosing to wash up near a stream instead. It was there that he encountered a peculiar sight: a deer with a red antler, smiling and gazing directly at him, without fear. Upon returning to camp, Joe's behavior took a strange turn, and later, in the evening, he mysteriously vanished, only to be found beneath a fallen tree. As night enveloped us, Joe began speaking in gibberish to a nearby tree before inexplicably consuming something beside it. Concerned, my Uncle Sam shone his flashlight towards Joe, witnessing a colossal entity devouring a dead animal nearby, a sight beyond the realms of bears or mountain lions. My uncle wasn't very clear about what he saw. He just explained that it was something giant eating a dead animal. Later on that night, paranormal activity started to occur while everyone was asleep. I happened to wake up from an unexplained sound in the forest. It sounded like someone calling for help or something, but as it got closer, I could hear it clearly say, "Help me, someone. My family has been eaten by something big." But that thing scared me so much that I could not pull myself together, because it was coming up from the tree near my brother's tent. These sounds and occurrences did not stop until dawn. That morning, I was so weak and pale, and so was my brother. After everyone knew of this, we all started to pack up without a word. Once we got back home, my grandmother performed blessings for us. During this process, I went unconscious and was told that I was possessed by a spirit of some sort. I went wild like an animal, thrashing my limbs around. I only then woke up to find myself bound to a chair with red and white strings on my legs and wrists. For my brother Joe, he was okay after that, but after this incident, we never went camping ever again. My father once told me that he was a big hunter back in Laos. He was also a pretty skeptical person, someone who doesn't claim seemingly unexplainable events to be occult, just because it is simply easier to explain it as a being of supernatural nature. I don't know what that means, but that's what the writer said. Anyways, there was one chilling encounter leading him to become a believer. It was about 4 a.m. in the morning when he started to leave the house. Still feeling tired, he quickly paced into the fog down the road to meet up with a longtime friend and hunting partner, Chaneng. At the crack of dawn, as he is approaching the foothills where they are about to meet, he felt a little uneasiness. Looking on from a distance, it appears that his partner is already there, standing by the tree lines looking at his direction. The humanoid-shaped figure slowly turned its head into the woods. My dad's first thought was, why is he not waiting for me? My dad repositioned his rifle on his back and started off towards the same direction afterwards. Slowly approaching the backwoods, he does not see his friend anywhere around. Suddenly, a chilling wind blows and the trees begin to creak. Straight away, my dad unexpectedly scopes in on an elderly woman walking very slow, not too far ahead of him. It does not dawn on him at the moment who she is and why she was there. He was surprised to see this farmer out so early by herself and going a completely different direction from the village farmstead. From beyond range, she was slightly indisposed and limping. As he got closer and is able to get a better up-close view, he notices that she was wearing a Hmong outfit. It appears to be very dirty and worn out. Her hair was messy and sticking out in all directions from underneath her faded purple turban. My dad also catches a glimpse of her shoes. They were threadbare and so pegged out that it was partially sliding off as it swept the ground with every step. He suddenly realized that those shoes were not just any ordinary shoes. They were instead shoes for the dead. The second that thought registered, it was like she knew what he was thinking. She stopped and slowly turned towards him. As they locked eyes, a million things went through his mind. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He decided to look onto the ground and repress his fear for a split second and back up. Suddenly, the old lady disappeared. Even after he saw that she was gone from view, he could still feel her presence and death all around him. He quickly made his way out of the woods to find his friend waiting for him. Without any words, his friend knew what happened from reading his face. It took a few days before he was comfortable enough to tell his friends the details of what he saw. My father said that he had never walked so fast home in his entire life before. After this incident, he stopped hunting for a few years. I used to go hunting deers and other animals by myself and never got scared because I had a gun and knew how to survive in the wild. But one time, in 2003, I was freaked the heck out because I think I saw something scary and didn't know what it was. It was my normal hunting trip and I was in my deer stand just waiting because I remember it was also very cold this time of the year in Minnesota. No deers were coming around, so I just sat there all day until it got darker and colder. Then, I heard some deers running far away, but they were too far away, so I couldn't shoot them. But there was something strange happening. The deers were running like they were afraid of something because they weren't acting normal. It was then that I saw a dark shadow or something following them. I was scared out of my mind. It was like a huge dark shadow or something, but I couldn't see it that well because there were a lot of trees between us and it was also getting dark. Anyway, I thought about climbing down and running away, but I was afraid that the deer might come my way and bring that thing over here. So I just stayed very close to the tree and didn't move, hoping that it would not come to me. This was a good move on my part because they all went crashing through the forest far away into a deeper part of the woods. I was so scared that I almost peed my pants at the time. Now, I don't go hunting that much anymore, and if I do, I go with my friends. This event happened to my dad and 8 of my uncles when they went hunting up by the Canadian border 5 years ago. The first 2 days of hunting were normal days, quiet. It wasn't until the 3rd day when one of my uncles noticed a large ape-like creature in the woods. He described the ape like Bigfoot, tall, long arms, and a long dark coat of fur. It also gave a horrible stench. My uncle told everyone and they all got scared. With this, they decided to head home that same night because they already knew what it was. Around noon, they packed up all their equipment and headed back home. Not even 4 minutes into the drive home, it got dark out and windy. During that strange phenomenon, you could hear trees fall in the distance. They heard a cry or a roar that they'd never heard before. Still, my dad and uncles kept on driving. Then, one of my uncles grabbed his handgun and shot a few rounds out the window. My other uncles did the same thing, and next thing you know, the cries got louder and louder. Wow, they got a lot of ammunition. Out of nowhere, something large landed on my dad's truck. My dad slammed on the brakes and that thing flew off into the front of the truck. My dad described the creature as a baboon with glowing red eyes and a long dark red fur coat. The ape thing grinned like a person at my dad. My dad stepped on the gas pedal and ran it over, and so did the other 2 trucks. Then, one of my uncles took out a flash grenade. What? He tossed it out of the window and they drove away fast. All they saw was the flash and then the sun came out, and it wasn't so windy anymore. When my dad got home, he checked on his truck and the trunk of it was messed up. The hardtop was indented. One of the rails on the side of the trunk was gone and the back window was broken. There were pieces of long, dark red hair stuck on the crack of the window. Okay, I lost it at the point where he pulled out the flash grenade. The handgun shooting out the window, I can understand, but the flash grenade, what is this? Like, what the hell's going on? Anyways, thank you for listening. Subscribe. When my family and I first moved to Minnesota from Thailand, I was only 8 years old. We lived in the project homes in West St. Paul. My mother would always tell me to go home before the sunset because we lived next to an old lady who was going crazy. The entire neighborhood called her insane. I thought that was very mean of the adults. At night, I could hear her singing her grandchild to sleep. I didn't think that was crazy at all. Every time I heard a baby cry, she would sing and the baby would stop crying. I enjoyed listening to her sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars and the alphabet song in broken English. Sometimes her singing even lulled me to sleep. My window stares into her bedroom and sometimes I see her rocking and lulling a wrapped baby in her arms to sleep and feeding the baby with a bottle. She must have been a great-grandmother because I rarely hear the baby cry. I didn't see this grandmother outside very often, but sometimes when I'm walking home from school, I would see her standing by her living room window, carrying a baby on her back. One night I couldn't sleep and heard the grandmother having an argument. She was too upset, so I didn't hear the other voice over this grandmother's loud voice. I think her daughter asked her to go babysit the other grandchildren. The grandmother said, "I refuse to go. I have another child to watch." The grandmother was yelling because she didn't want to leave her grandchild that she loved so much. I started to hear the baby cry because of the argument. I looked through my window and saw the grandmother picking up the baby, singing, rocking, and talking to the baby. The baby was giggling, laughing, and fell back to sleep. The next day, I came home and saw a bunch of cop cars outside of her house. I walked inside the house and overheard my mom talking to my aunt about how they finally took her. My mom was telling my aunt about how sad and depressed the grandmother next door had been since everyone died around her and that she outlived her family. She was not able to have any more children and her husband died right after they moved to America. She was completely alone. The grandmother lived alone next door. She would wrap her old Hmong clothes into the shape of a baby and pretend to cry like a baby, talk like a baby, and even laugh and giggle like a baby. The grandmother will even sing and rock the bundle of clothes in her arms back and forth, pretending to feed the baby and then put the baby to bed. My mom went on talking about how the grandmother also likes to carry the bundle of Hmong clothes on her back like a baby and have conversations with the bundle of clothes. According to my mom, last night, the grandmother had an argument with her dead family members because the grandmother didn't want to die yet. She still wanted to be with the bundle of Hmong clothes that she calls her baby. The grandmother cried so loud about how she didn't want to die that my mom could hear her, but her dead family forced her to wear Hmong clothes and she drowned herself in the bathtub. The police knocked on our door and asked if my dad had called 911 because they received a call from our house. My dad said no. The police asked my dad if he knew why she was holding onto a bundle of Hmong clothes and why she was wearing Hmong clothes and drowned herself. That night, I was scared to sleep. I asked my sister to sleep with me. After she fell asleep, I started to hear a baby cry, then heard the usual lullaby song, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. After that, I heard a baby laugh and giggle. Dang, that's just a sad story, man. If you have grandparents, love them while they're still alive. In 2007 in St. Paul, Minnesota, my aunt and uncle had moved into a new place and I had decided to take my 3-year-old daughter with me to pay them a visit. When we got there, we started to take a tour of the place on our own. After touring the upper and main level, we continued on to the next door that we had not opened yet. This door led to the basement. As I pulled the door open, a normal rush of air flew past me. In my heart, I instantly knew that there was something down there. Not paying much attention to that feeling, I proceeded down the stairs with my daughter. As we got down to the bottom of the stairs, I looked around and started opening doors in rooms. After looking into all the rooms, I proceeded back up the stairs, only to have my little girl rush in front of me. She climbed up 3 steps to be at my eye level and immediately turned to ask me to pick her up. I quickly stated no, and that she was already grown up enough to walk on her own. She then pleaded, and I gave her the same response. As I was finishing my sentence, she pointed somewhere behind me and said, "Monster." I felt goosebumps all over my entire body as I picked up my daughter and ran upstairs. We left the house not saying anything about the incident to my aunt or uncle. As they drove us back home, I asked my daughter what she saw, and she said that she saw a monster girl. I asked her how did that monster girl look, and my daughter refused to say much about it. To this day, I'm not too sure what she saw, but I love her so much that I hope she didn't have to put up with some ugly, rotten face of a monster. My uncle is a local city bus driver in St. Paul, Minnesota. There has been many stories about the deer or the little Hmong girls walking around Jackson Cemetery. I've heard many myself, but of course wouldn't want to experience seeing any of that. This story was told to my dad and I from my uncle a few years ago. He's a serious person in his mid-40s, so I'm sure he wouldn't just be making up stories. Anyways, here's how it goes. My uncle's bus route for the day was around the Como area and runs through the west side of the city. As for many of the people here in St. Paul may know, the bus station is about 3 to 4 blocks away from Jackson Cemetery off Highway 35E and Pennsylvania Avenue, I think. As his shift came to an end at 9 p.m., he drove onto Jackson Street, heading to the station. When he was passing the cemetery, about to make his turn towards the station, he saw a Hmong girl in her mid-teens, dressed in a white dress, of course, waving her hand for him to stop, and so he stopped by her. The girl had asked him if he could give her a ride to Oakdale by Carmike, the movie theater. He knew it was late and that wasn't his route, but he took her in anyway. Keep in mind, my uncle knew and has heard of stories about the Jackson Cemetery, but has never experienced anything himself. He started getting scared when he realized that she could perhaps be a ghost. Trying to stay calm, he tried not to think so much and continued driving. Right after you pass McKnight Avenue, there's another cemetery there, but he said that the girl asked for him to drop her off at the corner by the cemetery, and so he did. She paid and thanked him for the ride and got off. My uncle already knew that she wasn't human and that she had maybe already passed. As he dropped her off, he quickly drove back around and saw the girl walking into the cemetery until he could no longer see her anymore. He was scared, but he was also happy knowing that he helped her out, and thankfully she didn't do anything to harm him or scare him. He thinks that maybe she needed a ride to the other cemetery to perhaps meet or visit someone too. He kept the story to himself and didn't tell anyone until a few months had passed. I was about 7 years old when this supernatural occurrence happened. Many years ago, my family and I lived in a rented house in West St. Paul. I have a big family, so I slept in the same bedroom with my 2 older sisters. One morning, my uncle, who lived in East St. Paul, needed babysitters, so both of my older sisters went to help him. They were really close to my aunt, so after they babysat, they slept over with my aunt that night. That night, my grandma came to visit and she slept over. It was a regular night before bed. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. My grandma missed me a lot, so she slept in the same bed with me. Early in the morning, I was almost half asleep and half awake, but it was still very early because the sun wasn't quite up yet. I had a strange feeling like someone or something was close to me. I tried to play it off and go back to sleep, but it was hard to concentrate, having the feeling that someone or something was close to me. This feeling got stronger and stronger, and I could really feel heat right next to me. The only thought that came to my mind was, no one opened the bedroom door, or how could this be because I didn't hear the door open? I was a little scared because I wasn't sure what it was. Right when I opened my eyes, I saw a girl standing next to me with her head down. She had long black hair that covered her face. She was combing her hair slowly, section by section. I was so scared and instantly closed my eyes shut. I pulled my blanket over my head and was breathing heavily. I was so scared that I couldn't even yell or think straight. I realized, as thoughts were flowing through my head, that she wore a dress that I've seen before. The dress just looked so familiar, like I knew someone who had worn it or owned it. I decided to take another peek just to justify that I wasn't seeing things. The second peek, she was still there, next to me, combing her hair slowly. I closed my eyes again. In these couple of seconds, I was so frightened. I knew that my sisters were not home, so it couldn't have been any of them. I felt my grandma next to me. My mom was upstairs in her bed. I thought, who could this be? After a good 15 minutes, I was getting really warm under the sheets and had a little trouble breathing. I pulled down the sheets and peeked again. This time, she was gone. Again, I didn't hear the door open. The next morning, I woke up and didn't say anything to my family or my grandma. I guess I was trying to figure things out. At around 10 a.m., I saw my uncle drop off my sisters. One of my sisters took a shower. Right when she came out from the bedroom, I noticed that she was wearing that same dress that the girl was wearing. I don't remember why, but my parents and I moved in with my uncle and my new aunt. My new aunt had a son and 2 daughters from her previous marriage, and my uncle had 4 sons and 4 daughters from his previous marriage, but only the 2 youngest sons stayed with him. Oh, talk about a big family. After a while of living there, my aunt had her first baby with my uncle. Anyways, one day, my parents weren't home, and my aunt and uncle decided that they wanted to go to the casino, so the 6 of us kids were home alone with the baby. At this time, he was old enough now to sit, and as you may or may not know, we Hmong kids liked to play house. We were upstairs on the 2nd floor playing house. The thing is that upstairs was a lot more creepier than downstairs was, and they also had an attic. After a while of playing, I noticed the attic door, so I asked if I could see what was in there. One of my cousins opened the door, and it was too dark to see anything. We decided to leave the attic alone and left the door open a little. We went back to playing house. The steps that go upstairs would always squeak whenever anyone walked on it. Soon after, we would hear slow squeaks on the steps as if someone was going up the steps away from us. By this time, we were all quietly listening. And then we would hear slow squeaks as if someone was walking back towards us. If any of the adults were home, we'd hear them come in because they were loud talkers. But for some reason, we just couldn't hear anyone downstairs. As soon as one person started freaking out, another would soon follow, and it wasn't until we were all screaming, racing, pushing and shoving each other just to get down the stairs to get to the living room as soon as possible. We all ran to one couch and scrambled on top of each other. We also turned on the TV and turned up the volume so we wouldn't hear anything that we didn't want to hear. Soon, we realized that we left the baby upstairs, sitting on a big teddy bear. Arguing about who should go get him, we all came to a conclusion that we'd all go together and bring him down with us. We waited in the living room for a while, and when my aunt and uncle were the first to show up, we told them about what we heard. but they just brushed it off and said that we were being ridiculous. We don't know who shut the attic door, but since then, we never touched it again and never experienced anything again. Here is a true story. About a few years ago, my buddy dropped off his girlfriend off at home. He lives on Eastside St. Paul by the Phelan area. After dropping her off home by Battle Creek, he walked home. He was taking the state trail at night at around 10:30 p.m. when he saw a girl in white following him. It scared him, but he kept on walking. He turned around and she was gone. My buddy got home but didn't think much of it. However, a few days had passed and he kept on seeing the same girl everywhere he went. At school, at home, everywhere he was, he saw her. The strange thing is that no one else really noticed her, only he did. After a while, he got really sick and finally told his parents. His parents went to see many different shamans to see if they could help, but nothing worked. After nothing worked, their family began to go to church. It was only after this that he stopped getting sick and stopped seeing her, only for a bit. After a few weeks going to church, he then started to see her again. This still scared him because he didn't expect her to show up again. My buddy wasn't getting sick anymore, but he still kept on seeing her from time to time wherever he went. His parents thought that going to church had fixed everything, but that wasn't the case. Not wanting to make it a huge deal, he kept everything to himself. A few months went by and he still kept on seeing her, but she wasn't doing anything to hurt him. He just kind of got used to it and forgot about it. His dad asked him if he still sees her, but he says no. Truth is, he tells me he sees her from time to time, even to this day, but it doesn't bother him anymore. I've never personally experienced this, but I've always heard my parents talk about it here and there. Back in the 1990s, when we first immigrated to the US, our relatives found us a rental home in St. Paul to live in. It had really cheap rent. The house itself was old. The windows were shut tight and there was this unbearable odor. All the furniture from the previous renter was still there. I remember my dad saying that there was even a little pot with an egg still sitting on the stove. My parents often said that there was always a cat who came and sat at the window, staring into the house. At night, they would hear someone walking in the kitchen, touching the pots and pans and turning on the sink water. One night, my dad was woken up by the lights in the bathroom. The bathroom was across from their bedroom. The bathroom door was slightly open and the light was turned on. Someone was in the bathroom. My dad could make out that there was a person sitting on the toilet, and he could see their feet swinging back and forth. My dad was too tired to notice that my mom was sleeping next to him, so he said, "Honey, can you close the bathroom door?" All of a sudden, a hand reached out from the bathroom and closed the door. Not all the way, but a little. The next morning, my dad asked my mom, "Did your stomach hurt last night?" My mom replied, "No, what are you talking about?" He explained the whole story about what happened from last night. He said, "But I heard you. You were in the bathroom. You even giggled when I told you to close the door." My mom looked at my dad and said, "That wasn't me. I was sleeping next to you the whole night." They both looked at each other and quickly grabbed me from the bed and raced outside, across the street to my grandma's house. The following day, we moved out. The next day, my aunt's friend and her were talking. Her friend asked, "Why did you guys let your cousins move into that house? My uncle died in that house. He had a stomach problem and died using the bathroom. They found him a week later." My aunt came home and told everybody about what her friend had told her. Later on, the landlord finally told us that when they found his body, it was already starting to rot. After we moved out and another family moved in, my parents warned them, but they didn't believe. 2 days later, that family moved out. Everyone that had moved in moved out in less than a week.